Great. So I sent out or Gina sent out the agenda for today, and I just wanted to start out with just doing a quick temperature check because I know it's Thursday. It's like by this time during the week we all feel a little low energy. It's just good to know what I'm walking into. So I'd love to let me put this in the chat so you have it. 1 second. All right, so just you can give me a word. You can type it in the chat. Red means you have low energy. Yellow means you may be a little tired, but you're just a little distracted. And green means you're ready, which I feel like green because I have to be. I'm ready to facilitate. But everyone's feeling at a yellow, which is not surprising and okay. There's no judgment here. This is just a pulse check for me to know what I'm dealing with. Yellow. Okay, so we've got a lot of yellows, and I hope that by the end of our time together, you've got a little bit more energy. I didn't deplete it any more than necessary, but thank you for that. We will get going. A few things. Let me organize myself here, and I'm just going to share. 1 second. Here it is. So we're just going to go over the agenda and the Google Drive I created. I wanted us to have a space where we could work together, and add things. So I'm going to share my screen momentarily just to walk through what I did. All right, so here is the space for us. All of our materials will be here, uploading all of the agendas, any resources. Now this is interesting. I've added a few things. Thanks, Mel, for some of these items to include, like the inclusive ADDIE model, which you all have probably seen. And then we, for our SNHU project, we're looking at words like whitelist and blacklist. So this is just a resource to look at. And then someone that I worked with did a primer on critical race theory, because I know that has come up quite a bit, has been in the news, has been like a backlash against it. And so if you're interested in sort of knowing how to respond or think about some of that backlash, this primer really is helpful. So I'm just starting to amass some resources for y'all. If you have resources, feel free to upload them. We're just starting to build a library together, which I think is important. And then, again, it's pretty sparse right now, but we'll get to it. I'll explain what these scenarios are later. But the first thing I wanted to do was walk us through this Equity by Design file, which is basically the social justice work that we had started last week. The social justice, I had asked you all to define social justice for yourself, which is in keeping with Equity by Design and sort of the way they start off a professional learning community. And I thought it'd be important for us to do. So what I did was, you all down here, this is what everyone contributed. And what I did was I took that and sort of looked for patterns and things that seemed similar in definition, and then created one broad definition. It is very broad. It is perhaps, high level, but I feel like it's a good starting place for us to have, like, this is the foundation that we're working with. This is a definition we've co-created. So I'll read the beginning. Social justice is the belief that everyone deserves the same opportunities, privileges, rights, and access to opportunity in all aspects of society, and the acknowledgement that we need to work together to meet these common goals. We define social justice as active work in reducing social, economic, and structural barriers of access to resources, education, housing, employment, food, water, to create a fair and just society for all to benefit from. Now, I highlighted or bolded active work because I always think that's important. We all may have these beliefs, which it seems like we all are at least coming to the table with these beliefs. Active work is like, now what are we doing to address some of these things? Now, this is a huge, lofty definition, and we can't in our roles address necessarily all of these things. So I started to think about, because many of you talked about being learning designers and how the idea of social justice works in what you do, that I created an additional definition. So as learning designers, our active work in supporting social justice is focused on creating learning environments where all learners can be successful. A socially just approach to course design centers equity and inclusion to all. There's an intentional focus on creating safe learning spaces where unbiased inclusivity is valued by the participants and is demonstrated by the instructor, which ultimately allows students to grow their knowledge and engage with the content in ways that are meaningful to them. So this was my attempt at consolidating what you had written and given us a common definition to work with as a guiding principle. I imagine that as time goes on, if we want to add to it, make it more specific, we can do that. But I wanted to pause for a moment and just get another pulse check on what you thought of these definitions. Do they feel like they are things that you can get behind and at least give us that guiding definition that we can follow going forward?
I like the active work component of it, because yeah, you could have beliefs or perceptions or anything, but the actual attempt to change.
Exactly. Or the actual active work in what we do to realize a lot of these goals. So I thought it was important too. I think I picked that up from someone's definition. Great. So yes, Madison, this is just a place to start, something to give us, a place to grasp onto as we move forward. And again, we can make it more specific as we keep going. Okay, so let me go back and thank you to all of you who have contributed to the definition. It was great to see the synergy around that. Okay, so now, because last week we did a lot of sort of intro stuff, talking about the work. Now we're going to do some of the work, which is to be discussing those questions that we haven't really gotten to yet. And I wanted to make sure we focused on that today. And the way that I want to do that, because there's 3 questions that I think are the meatiest, I want to do that in small groups. It's a smaller, large group than we had last time. So we'll have 3 groups, most likely 2 groups of 3, 1 of 4. Let me just make sure, or make sure my math is correct. 2 groups of 4, 1 of 3. That's what we'll do. And if you have access to that agenda, the questions that you will address are there. I'm going to put them in the chats in case you don't have the agenda right in front of you. Okay. So here's how we'll do this. Each group will have 8 minutes in their small groups to address one of these questions. I'll assign you based on your group number, which question you'll get. And then you each will have 8 minutes to come back to the larger group and share what you discussed. So someone should volunteer to present that or decide how you want to present that when you first get in your group. And then we'll have a large group discussion about all these questions using what you present as a starting point. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to begin to set up the group so you can ask your questions if you have them. Okay, so it randomly did this. And so hopefully you all are in groups that makes sense, but here we go. And I'll give you warnings as we get going. know that 60-second warning is very abrupt and it's cut you out, so I apologize if someone was mid-sentence and you got cut off, so. Hopefully that was enough of time to like get going on something, but well, we shall see. So we'll start with question one, group one. I'll give you 8 minutes total, and in that 8 minutes, you just present what you discussed, any open-ended questions that might have arisen, and then we will discuss as a large group and then move on to the next question. So group one.
That was us. Well,
I can speak to it a little bit, Gina, if you want me to.
sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So our question was about hidden curriculum and just what we thought of it, and how do we deal with hidden curriculum when we are dealing with instructors in our positions. And one thing that we really started talking about is, which was mentioned in the book, is giving students opportunities to like personalize their learning. And we're talking about how do you find a balance for students to personalize their learning and then also like grade the students fairly, and what to consider for rubric criteria. And one thing we discussed is if you provide students with that opportunity where maybe they could submit different deliverables, we have seen like pushback from instructors because it's extra work for them. So we're just trying to find how do we get instructors on board to allow for that, and make assignments fair for students, and how do we get instructors to consider these factors. So that was what our conversation was based on.
And did you come up with any initial ideas about that, or things that have been successful in work that you've done?
Angela shared a positive story that happened to her yesterday, but I feel like this is like an outlier. Angela, if you want to share what you just told us about Christ College, what happened?
Sure. Sorry, my dog's a little barky today, but I feel like so often I work with professors who are really, they're really in a box, and I work to get them out of the box sometimes, and it's a little bit adversarial. But yesterday I was talking to Ryan at the Christ College, and he mentioned, being a sage on the stage and how he didn't want to have that role. And I was shocked that he even knew that term, because I think that term is foreign to a lot of the instructors that we work with. And I talked to him about using a graphic organizer for one of the assignments, and he didn't balk at it. He was really interested. And, sometimes I have to really do a little bit of a song and dance if we're not doing a paper or a discussion, because it's so different. Instructors have a hard time with that. So I'm pretty excited about working with him, because I don't have to move him very much. He's already in a really open place, which is it's such a treat, really.
Yeah. Has anyone else had, a situation where they moved a faculty member or an instructor from one place to the other, even if it was a little bit more challenging? I'm sure you have. I'm just sort of leading.
We all probably have at some point, because we don't have a choice. We have to, deliver an end product. And we have dealt with some difficult, if I'm being polite, instructors where we have transitioned them and, got them on board, even if it was a little bit difficult.
We could probably remember the ones that don't budge more than the ones that do.
I know. You're exactly right, Mel.
That's true.
Yeah. We talked about how the example in the book with the behavior management, and if you're communicating like this is how it's going to be, and that then filters into the students thinking there's only one way to do things. And then that's how we got into the conversation of, personalization. But like that behavior management piece is very K-12, because you just don't want it to be the wild, wild west, right? But I think that transitions to what we talked about in the rigidity of faculty members. Like, to me, it's kind of the same thing when you get into the higher ed space, faculty members are rigid for a variety of reasons. But what does that communicate to the learner? And how can we flip that around so the hidden curriculum becomes more positive messaging to students rather than the negative aspects of this rigidity, I guess. I don't know. For some reason, I always think of it as it's being communicated in a negative way to students. So, which it doesn't have to be. The hidden curriculum doesn't have to be negative. It can, right?
Right.
Or
Yeah,
maybe
it's more
that's
about being transparent, right? About
correct, being transparent. Yes. So,
yeah, it's like even or just those hidden expectations that some students know because they may have been more exposed to different teaching styles or what have you, and some students may not know, and they're getting penalized for that. So I think that to me was another aspect of the hidden curriculum that I found interesting.
yeah. I think it connects to the work we're trying to do with continuous improvement also. Like this is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to differentiate in the moment and support students for who they are and where they are. And that ultimately is the goal.
And so back to this idea of different assignments or that pushback that you get around creating multiple ways for students to submit things or multiple assignments. What has been, because I think that is a key thing. And now in my discipline, it's a little easier, I think, because I'm a writer and I teach creative writing. So I give my students a lot of choice. Like you can do poetry, you can do long form, short stories, things like this. It's a little bit easier to do that maybe than with some of the other disciplines. So I just wonder what's been successful in that realm, like in terms of helping faculty or asking faculty to give students more choice.
The main issue that we talked about is it's ultimately more work on the faculty, and they know that, which is why there's some resistance to it. So, I mean,
yeah,
it's any ideas to get them on board with that variety of deliverables, or I mean, anything would be helpful, because that's our biggest issue is they'll come right out and say that's more grading, or yeah.
I mean, you all, I'd love to hear from the large group, but from my point of view, they have to grade it anyway, right? What does it matter what the topic is that the students have chosen to write? That may be simplistic, but I mean, there's a lot of variables to that statement I just made. But if you have to grade, are you looking for like the same thing across the board? I mean, I just sort of wonder, what are some questions you can ask faculty to help them see that it's actually not it doesn't have to be more work.
See, I think it would be more interesting to not sit and grade like 30 papers of the same thing, but I don't know.
This is like from a learner perspective. When I took a certificate course, Natalie, you might have taken it because you went through UW Stout's instructional design certificate program, right? There was one instructor that it was one of the most memorable courses that I've ever taken. And she had designed, it's almost like she designed 3 different summative projects that you could choose from that all hit sort of a similar competency or goal. So it wasn't so much just saying, here's the prompt, now submit it in a video or submit it in a PowerPoint slide, but it was like, you could actually take this avenue and go through this gamification route, or you can write a paper, or you could do, and she like, I just remember it being a really creative way of thinking about that summative.
Yeah, it's a great point.
I wish I could remember what the actual activities were. Do you remember that, Natalie?
Was it Susan Manning? Was that the facilitator?
I think so. I think
she was
so.
amazing.
She was
amazing.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah,
I wonder if I could dig up anything
Yes.
related to that.
I also think with that example, what helps is they see their colleagues doing this with success. You know what I mean? Like, look at these examples, what other people are doing, and then sometimes that gets them to come around, or like for like example, with the Christ College, the reason they're coming to us is because they're losing their students, retention, they're not being successful. So if this particular instructor that Angela is working with is going to embrace this, and I would think his students be more
Model
successful,
professor, yeah.
that's also going to speak to faculty. Wait a minute, my students are still failing and his aren't. What's going on? So, and
That's a great point, Gina, like to provide examples like of successes from other instructors, like this is how it was done. Here are ways that we can do this. Like just, I think sometimes instructors seeing like the finished product or something before they get into it, because I feel like there's a lot of resistance if the idea is vague, but if we could like provide specific successful examples, I think that would help get them more on board.
Natalie, and then just a thought on that, Madison.
I'm keep going.
Okay. No, I was going to say that could be something we can put in Google Drive as well, like just, examples of assignments where it is actually just using the same rubric or the same competency, but allowing multiple ways of meeting those needs or meeting those competencies. So any examples like that would be helpful to have, even though it's not necessarily specific to the college you're working with or the university you're working with, but it's also helpful to get in the door, like to help faculty see the potential of what they can do. So we can start to build or gather those as well. All right, so I know that was short. I appreciate that. It's the way to kind of get us started. I wanted to move us to group 2 in question 2 so that we have a little time to discuss that one as well. So where are my group 2 folks?
That was us. So the question was, equity is hearing somebody's voice about what they need and providing them with that. How does that translate into what we do as learning designers? Our biggest takeaway from chapter 3 was really that there's a lot of great tools in there and a lot of great suggestions, but that's assuming that we have access to the learners and we know what the learner's voice is. That's very different for us. We don't have that knowledge or that access to students. We don't do the evaluations. We don't see their responses to surveys. So that's really hard to, design for their voice without knowing what that is. So we do rely on a lot on SMEs and faculty to tell us, what their students think. But as the book said, there was an example in there that said 80% of faculty thought that they were, hearing their students and caring for their students, and 80% of the students felt that they were not heard or cared for. So when we translate that to SMEs, I think it's safe to assume they don't really know. So that's, concerning. So one idea that we discussed was the use of surveys. So we often use surveys like mid-course surveys and at the end of the course, just to get a feel for what the students thought of the content or whatever it may be. They're pretty generic. So, there were some examples of some really great questions in the text that we could use and repurpose for these surveys. So less about, do you like the content, and more about, do you feel like you belong, you're accepted in this course? Do you feel like your viewpoint is being heard? Is this content meaningful to you? Things like that. And not necessarily because we'll get that feedback, because we may not, but at least the instructors and the faculty are hearing that and hopefully making the connection between, engagement with the course and these responses. And also using maybe an initial survey, which we don't typically do, but what are your expectations for how you will engage in this course? Or, given what your goals are, what will make this course meaningful for you?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. So just really putting the onus on students, especially because we are designing for adult students. We have to, let them, decide how, I guess that's true for all students, but yeah, just putting some of the onus on them to decide what will make this successful.
That's great. And as part of your process, do you include mechanisms for students to reach out one-on-one to instructors in a private space? Things things like that, that instructors can get feedback like from, individually from a student at any point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's like explicit.
Okay.
I think that is usually an option. I don't know that all instructors are really open to that. But yes, I think that that's usually an option. I think that's something that maybe we can leverage a bit more, for sure, to get that feedback.
Yeah, what are, I'm going to open it up to the large group. Oh, Mel, did you?
Oh, I was just going to say, we always put in kind of a general questions and discussion forums, but in talking about like the safe space of voicing concerns, somebody may not want to be able to do that in like a public arena. So kind of those one-to-one opportunities are definitely really good to build in, or even like at milestones, have some feedback checkpoints, as we were talking about,
Yeah, you
that are
mentioned.
private, more.
Yeah.
Right. I was doing work for UVM this morning, and it was like pulling discussion board questions off of Yellow Dig. And one thing that I liked, two things that I liked that the instructor did. So this was like an ArcGIS class, which is, like with landscapes and everything. And there were these really intense labs. And after every lab, he had a lab reflection discussion where it was just like kind of an open conversation, and like students would be like, I got really stuck at this point, and they would like give each other pointers, and they'd say, oh, I got stuck here too. And then another thing that I like that he did, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about with question 1, is their final project. They had to pick a topic in Vermont where they had to like use ArcGIS and like find data and present it on a map. But he let them pick whatever topic they wanted. Like it could be about a specific town, or it could have been about the whole state of Vermont. And then they all shared it with each other. So just like giving them that variety. But I liked the weekly check-ins after each lab just to get some feedback. And it wasn't all positive. It was like, I was ready to pull my hair out with this lab, but he was really active in the discussions too, which was awesome. I thought, just to get that feedback and have that conversation going.
I mean, that's great, because you're also, they're building relationships with students too. So if the students see them active in discussion boards and maybe even commenting one-on-one on these reflections, perhaps, like it starts to build that sense of like, okay, that safe space that we've been talking about, or at least a space where students feel like they can share their voice in some way.
Yeah, I think those reflective exercises are really good too. When done right, can be really, can spark that metacognitive thinking. So like really getting into the like learning about how they learn, and even comparing to how other students may have gone about it, and understanding, oh, okay, so the way that I did it is not the only way, but it's how I chose to do it. Having that comparison and really understanding how they learn and how they approach things.
Yeah, I love that. I wish all instructors were like, had a design mind like that. Some of them do, some of them, struggle a little bit with that thinking, but yeah, no, I love what you just said, because I think that's important. Okay, so got a third group ready. Let's just see how far we get with that, with group 3.
So for group 3, that was Natalie and Ari and me. And our question was from chapter 1 and 4, how does the UDL framework support equal access to teaching and learning? How does the UDL process discussed in chapter 4 align to the process you use when you work with faculty? How does it differ? And we had a rambling conversation that was very interesting and informative, to me anyway. We started at first talking about this flow chart that's in the book on page 74, the UDL flow chart. And I really appreciated this flow chart. I was telling my group, I've been going back to it repeatedly as I've been preparing for a meeting that I have with the SME tomorrow. I've only met with them one time, and I'm new to Ease Learning. And so this kind of, the meetings that we have with SME, these live talking meetings where we're on video and we're actually interacting instead of just doing it through emails. I love it, but it's also challenging in the sense that I want to be respectful of the SME and all of their education and experience as I am trying to move them toward more diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so this flowchart was so helpful. I really appreciated like the second column down, I mean, the second row down on the left, this little question: before the lesson begins, do students have options to self-reflect on the standard and their background knowledge, take a diagnostic assessment or view exemplars, rubrics, etc., to help foster self-reflection and goal setting? And then if the answer is no, then it gives you little pointers of what to say to the SME. I know that probably wasn't the intent of the authors, but I love that because it gives me an idea of how to redirect the conversation back to UDL and to have some research on my side to be able to suggest to the SME that we do what EASE is trying to do with the prepare to learn activities at the beginning of each module. And so I'm anticipating that some SMEs, maybe the one that I'm working with right now, might be hesitant to add more new things to the course because the SME's taught the course for a long time, is fairly happy with the way it works and with what he already has in there.
Wow.
And so this flowchart is really helping me prepare for that meeting and giving me confidence about positive ways that I can present these options to the SME. I think Natalie had some things to share too.
Well, I volunteered to be the second, second speaker, but Ari was, I mean, related to that point, Ari was talking about how in training, you know, she would, back to this idea of surveying, not only to ask students, are you getting what you need, but what do you already know? So that it's relevant and not, you know, that wasn't boring anyone. And then in the same vein, when you do this pre-work, in addition to a survey, you can do an actual activity where people sample the real work, which is motivating to students, right? So I think it's really young students in particular don't find it relevant to sit and listen to a lecture if no one's explained why it's relevant. So to start off with application is helpful. And then a bunch of us signed up this morning to attend this conference on inclusion later this week or next week. And one of the speakers is Sandra McGuire. And that came to mind because on 82, Amanda Hughes does this implementation spotlight and she talks about explicit education and the Pomodoro technique. And so Sandra McGuire talks about metacognition, making students aware of metacognition. And then there's a structure that employs something like the Pomodoro technique. And then these checklists, we were talking about how we keep track of our own checklists, but there's a way that's about me. My pet project is transparent assignment design, which is from Tilt Higher Ed. And it's about inclusion as well, because you're making the hidden curriculum clear, being explicit, providing checklists, providing structure. I think someone said, you know, someone earlier said, thing that I can't remember now.
Around the hidden curriculum.
Yes,
Anyone?
yes.
Yeah, no, what I liked about Equity by Design is the practical tools and application that you all spoke of, in particular the UDL flowchart and the checklist idea that they give us. And so it's really like, how do we now apply this to what we do or to what you all do at EASE? Did anyone else have a chance to or want to weigh in on the question 3, the UDL flowchart, or anything that members of group 3 have said?
No, I didn't know. I didn't think of it the way, Sherry, that you thought of it. Like, oh, you can actually use this for little pointers to work with SMEs. So like, I'll definitely bookmark this and keep this in mind for future SME meetings.
Yes, I was delighted to find that.
Yeah, I did the same.
I'm glad to hear it. I was sort of imagining, and you'll see going forward, I have a thought about scenarios that we could sort of put forth and discuss to give us talking points around certain things that might come up as we move forward in this work. Mel, you got off mute. I don't know if you want to share.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of like UDL, like when I would, we always map activities to UDL, and sometimes I would like go to the three categories: multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression, and sort of see, like when you, Hannah, you were talking about metacognition of just like, okay, the first part is like recruiting interest for me. Like, how do we like sort of get learners like to be interested and feel like they're participating in something authentic or relevant or meaningful to them? And then the other aspects of like providing multiple means of representation, and like, how do we set up some of the basic ways that they can access the information, comprehend the information, and find it to be relevant to them. And then the metacognition is like that aspect of reflecting. So sometimes I'll like even go through, Sherry, like you were talking about, like the flow chart, and look at those elements and sort of see like, are we covering all of these areas? And then of course, specific activities we map to. But one thing that I was also kind of thinking as designers, and particularly we're so good at looking at language and looking at like when we're working with SMEs directly, and we're kind of like nuancing prompts, we're really unpacking what are the steps involved in achieving a particular outcome. But at every step of the way in which we work in that design process, I feel like we can always check like, okay, is this what you mean? Or sort of even remind faculty, like, how might this be perceived by a learner who's trying to answer this question, who may be coming from an alternate, a different background or different perspective. And I feel like we can kind of interrogate the language a little bit along the way. And that's one way that we can, so not only look for all of these areas, but like we can really kind of try to be in that empathy perspective. We used to do the activity that was like an empathy diagram, or I can't remember what it was, but it was like where you would put in these 4 buckets in past trainings that we've done, where on and like, okay, so if I were in the shoes of a learner, how might this come across to me? So I don't know, those are some other reflections.
Interesting, like putting yourself in the shoes of the end user or the student.
Yeah. And we might not be able to, like Hannah was saying, like know exactly who the learners are. We may have a sense, like we know ESL learners are adult learners, English is their second language. They don't have a lot of technology, access to technology in this one program. But what we could do is try to learn as much as we can about that, but also anticipate, okay, if you had learners who, were dealing with this issue or coming from this perspective or this background, like how might that change the way that they interpret? So I think a lot of our interpretive power or lens that we have as designers, we can always critically look at that.
Yeah, no, spot on. And yeah, I know this is a lot of content to kind of go through in the short time we have. So I don't want to rush, but we are nearing the end of that conversation. And I wanted to give you a chance to just process that a little bit and think about how everything that you're talking about, because you already all do a lot of this thinking and work that is described in Equity by Design, but like, how does that translate to now the DEI rubric that you are working with? And I came up with a couple of, so in the chat, questions to think about to get us to the point of how does this all map to the DEI rubric, and what are some outstanding questions that you might still have, or some thoughts that you want to share, anything like that. So I just wanted you to have a couple minutes to think about that. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to do this, to think about these questions on your own, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap it up, but just 2 minutes. I know that's a short 2 minutes, but wanted to wrap up with that activity so that you can, if there are things that are coming up, in particular with question 2, if you would share those with me. It doesn't have to be now, but I'd be curious to know as we plan for, okay, now let's put this rubric along with what we've been working on with Equity by Design together, and then figure out how we're going to actually implement or work on this going forward. And so to sort of think about that, I started to put together some faculty scenarios. Now, these may be things that you may have already encountered or not, but I put the link in the chat. Just some things that I might have heard, maybe allegedly over the years, or things that people have said to me in my work as a learning designer, in their pushback. There are many things, but this was a few I thought that were related a little bit more to the rubric idea and what we've talked about in Equity by Design. And so I wanted to move us in our next session to start to think about how we respond to these things. Or if you have specific questions or thoughts that came up for you in that second question I asked as a final question that you want to share with me that we can talk about as well during our next session, I'd love that. I just want to hear more around what are some of the challenges you think you might encounter as we continue. I mean, you've already talked about quite a few, but what are some specific to that rubric? Any other thoughts or questions or things you want to share before we wrap up today? So hopefully your energy is not at red now. Hopefully at least it's still yellow or maybe a little higher. I hope, I can pray.
A bright yellow now.
Okay, thank you,
Yellow.
Jessica. I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Are we supposed, do you want us to email you or add a comment in a document?
Either, whatever you're comfortable with. Email me if you want to share something that you don't want others to see. Put it in the document if you're okay with thinking about it out loud, I guess. And then I will form an agenda that makes sense based on what we've talked about and based on the rubric questions that you all have running up against. Gina, you're off mute. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything before I wrap it up.
Oh, well, yeah, thank you. And it is a really I know we're all really busy. It is very nice to just sit back and talk to each other about these things. I think the whole session just fosters we're practicing what we are trying to implement with our clients as well. So it's just nice to sit back and get together and hear from everybody. So yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. I look forward to getting any comments from you about that, about the scenarios.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is-
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.